I guess I never thought I'd be the guy to write one of these, but here I am. It all started about 6 months ago when my wife, Stacey, got obsessed with yoga. She used to be into running, but after an injury, she needed something low impact. That's when she found Jake, her yoga instructor. Young, fit, with that whole free spirit vibe. He was everything I wasn't. At first, I didn't mind. I was happy she found something to help with her stress. Plus, she seemed really excited about it, and I didn't want to be the jealous husband. But then something started to feel off. She would come home late, gushing about her yoga sessions, how they were more like spiritual journeys than just a workout. I would listen, nod along, but in the back of my mind, I started to feel uneasy. The first red flag came when she started getting picked up by the same rideshare driver every time she went to yoga. Stacey claimed it was just coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences like that. How many drivers could there be in this small town? She got comfortable with him. Too comfortable, maybe. One night, I overheard her talking to the guy when she thought I was asleep. She was laughing a little too hard, flirting even. That knot in my stomach twisted tighter, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to be paranoid. Then, things escalated. Stacey started taking private sessions with Jake, just to deepen her practice, she said. The sessions weren't at the studio anymore, though. They were at his house. And the driver? Well, he was still the one taking her there and back, often hours later than expected. When I asked her about it, she snapped, calling me controlling and saying I didn't understand how much yoga meant to her. I let it go. I loved her too much to believe the worst. I trusted her, or at least I tried to. But that trust shattered one evening. She came home wearing a new dress, a tight, sexy little number I had never seen before. She had that post-yoga glow, but this was different. I asked her where she'd been, and she spun some story about a last-minute class, something about a friend's birthday dinner afterward. But the way she avoided eye contact, the way her hands shook as she hung up her purse, told me everything I needed to know. Still, I didn't have proof. So, I waited, hoping I was wrong, but deep down, I knew. My wife was slipping away, right under my nose, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it, or if I even wanted to anymore. That night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling, trying to push the thoughts out of my mind. But they wouldn't go away. Something was happening between her and Jake, something I wasn't ready to face. Part of me hoped I was overthinking it, but part of me, the part that had been married to this woman for 10 years, knew I was on the brink of a devastating discovery. I wish I could say I was wrong, that the pit in my stomach was just paranoia. But that's not how this story goes. A few weeks after the new dress incident, I started noticing more changes. Stacey was on her phone constantly, giggling at texts and hiding the screen whenever I walked by. She started leaving the house at weird times, claiming she needed alone time to clear her head. Alone time. Right. One Saturday, I decided to follow her. She told me she was going to the yoga studio for a class, but my gut told me otherwise. I waited until she left and then got in my car, keeping a safe distance as I tailed her. Sure enough, she didn't go to the studio. She went to Jake's house. I parked a block away, sitting there in my car, watching as she knocked on his door. When he opened it, they didn't hesitate. They kissed. Not just a peck on the cheek, but a deep, intimate kiss. The kind we hadn't shared in months. I felt my heart drop. It's a strange feeling, watching your marriage crumble right in front of you. My chest tightened, but I stayed put, trying to keep it together. She went inside, and I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying every moment in my head, trying to figure out how I could have let this happen. I should have driven away, but something in me snapped. I had to know. So I got out of the car and walked toward the house. The blinds were half closed, but I could see just enough through the cracks. Stacey was there, lying on his couch, her head resting on Jake's chest like they had done this 1,000 times before. He was running his hands through her hair, whispering something that made her laugh. Then, the moment I feared the most, they started undressing. My wife, the woman I had spent 10 years with, was having sex with another man. In my mind, I had always pictured catching her in bed with someone else would send me into a rage, but in reality, I just felt numb. It was like my brain shut off, unable to process what I was seeing. I stumbled back to my car, shaking. I couldn't go inside. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. That night she came home like nothing happened. She even kissed me on the cheek, telling me she had a great class and was going to take a shower. I just stared at her, feeling like I was watching a stranger. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time she touched me, I felt disgusted, but I still didn't confront her. I needed more. I needed proof. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. If she was going to lie to my face, I needed solid evidence. And sure enough, the PI came back with photos. Photos of them meeting up at his house, at the park, even at a hotel. It wasn't just yoga sessions. It was a full-blown affair. When I finally confronted her, I thought she'd deny it. I thought she'd cry and beg for forgiveness. But instead, she laughed. She laughed in my face, telling me I was pathetic for hiring someone to spy on her. "What? You couldn't just talk to me like a man?" she sneered. I felt the blood rush to my face as she continued her rant. "It's not what you think," she lied. "Jake and I are just friends. You're being ridiculous." But the pictures, the videos, the lies, everything was right there in front of us, and she still wouldn't admit it. Then she dropped a bombshell I wasn't prepared for. She was pregnant. "We're having a baby, and you want to blow up our marriage over a little fling?" She spat at me, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Grow up." But that's when I realized something terrible. She didn't even know if the baby was mine or Jake's. And suddenly, I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at the ruins of my life. The room spun around me as the words left her mouth. Pregnant, and she didn't even know whose baby it was. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at this woman who used to be my entire world, now a stranger in my own home. I don't know if it's yours or Jake's," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a low murmur, as if saying it softer would somehow make it less true. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. The woman I had loved, the one I'd built a life with, was now carrying a baby that might not even be mine. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I just stood there, paralyzed by the weight of it all. Stacey crossed her arms, leaning against the counter with that smug look I had come to hate. "Look, I didn't want this to happen, okay? It just did. Things between us haven't exactly been perfect, and Jake, he understands me." "Understands you?" I spat back, my voice trembling. "Is that what you tell yourself? That he understands you while you're screwing him in the same bed we made our life in?" She rolled her fucking eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable here. "Oh, come on, stop being so dramatic. It's not like you've been Mr. Perfect either. Maybe if you spent less time at work and more time paying attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." That hit me hard. I had worked my ass off to give us a good life. I thought I was doing the right thing, making sure we had a nice house, money in the bank, a future. But apparently, that wasn't enough for her. "And what? This is my fault?" I asked, my voice barely holding back the anger that was bubbling to the surface. "You cheat on me, get pregnant, and somehow it's my fault?" Stacey shrugged, her expression cold and indifferent. It takes two to make a marriage fall apart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman who had stood next to me at the altar, promising to love and honor me, was now treating me like a nuisance, like I was the one in the wrong. "Are you even sorry?" I asked, my voice cracking with the sheer disbelief of it all. "Sorry?" She barked out a laugh. "For what? For finding someone who actually listens to me? For finally feeling alive again?" That was it. The last straw. I wasn't just angry. I was done. "You want to feel alive, Stacey? Fine. Feel alive without me," I snapped, the decision hitting me like a truck. "I'm filing for divorce." For a split second, I saw her mask crack. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, but just as quickly it was replaced by that same smug smirk. "Oh, please, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to leave your pregnant wife. What will your family think? What will people say?" She thought she had me cornered, thought I'd be too afraid of what people would think, that I'd stay with her out of some misplaced sense of obligation. But what she didn't realize was that the baby might not even be mine. And even if it was, I couldn't spend another day living this lie. "I don't give a damn what people think," I shot back. "You made this mess, Stacey. Now you can live with the consequences." I could see the panic starting to rise in her. She wasn't used to me standing up for myself. She wasn't used to me walking away. "You can't just leave," she hissed. "What about the baby?" I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around everything. The baby. Our baby. Or Jake's. I didn't even know which option was worse. "We'll get a paternity test," I said, my voice cold. "And if it's mine, I'll be there for the kid. But for you, we're done." Stacey's face twisted into something ugly, a sneer that made her look like a completely different person. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me?" she snarled. "I'll take you for everything. The house, the money, everything. You'll regret this." But I didn't care. I was past caring. Whatever hell she wanted to drag me through, it couldn't be worse than what I was already living. I turned and walked out of the room, my mind racing. I needed space, time to think. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I could hear her screaming after me. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll come crawling back. Just wait." But I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could think about was the life I thought I had, the life she had destroyed, and what the hell I was supposed to do next. I drove for what felt like hours, my mind racing as I tried to wrap my head around everything. I kept replaying the scene in my head, her laughing at me, dismissing me as if none of this was a big deal. The woman I had married, the mother of what might be my child, had no remorse. She was almost proud of it. I ended up at my buddy Mike's place. We hadn't seen each other in a while, but he was the only person I could trust with this. I knocked on his door, and the second he saw me standing there, he knew something was wrong. "Dude, you look like shit," he said, letting me in without a second thought. We sat down in his kitchen, and I just let it all spill out. The affair, the pregnancy, the lies, everything. Mike listened quietly, his face growing more serious with each detail I shared. By the time I was done, I could barely breathe, the weight of it all crushing me. "Man, I don't even know what to say." Mike finally spoke, running a hand through his hair. "That's fucked up." "Tell me about it," I muttered, staring blankly at my coffee. "I don't even know if the baby is mine. And if it's not, God, I don't know if I can handle that." Mike shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "You need to get a lawyer. Like now. You can't let her walk all over you, man. She'll take everything if you don't fight back." "I know," I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I'm filing for divorce, but what if the kid's mine? Do I just cut her out of my life, or do I have to stick around for this mess?" Mike didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his eyes serious. "Look, you do what you have to for the kid if it's yours. But Stacey, you gotta get out, man. She's toxic." Toxic. That was the perfect word for it. Every interaction with her over the past few months had been like poison, slowly eating away at me. I had tried to ignore it, tried to pretend everything was fine, but it wasn't. And it never would be. I stayed at Mike's that night, unable to face Stacey or our house. The next morning, I woke up early and made a decision. I was done playing nice. If she wanted a war, I was ready. The first step was calling a lawyer. Mike had a friend who had gone through a nasty divorce, and he gave me the name of the attorney who handled his case. I wasn't going to let Stacey take everything I had worked for, not without a fight. Later that day, I went back to the house to get some things. I wasn't sure if Stacey would be home, but I didn't care. I needed to start separating my life from hers. When I pulled up to the driveway, I saw her car parked out front. Great. I walked inside, bracing myself for whatever fresh hell was waiting. Stacey was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me, she gave me that fake smile she'd perfected over the past few months. "Back already?" she asked, not bothering to stand up. "I figured you'd be out sulking longer." I ignored her, heading straight to the bedroom to grab some clothes. I could hear her following me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "So what, you're just gonna leave? You think that's gonna fix anything?" she called after me, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I stuffed my clothes into a duffel bag, trying to keep my cool. "I'm staying at Mike's for a while," I said flatly. "I'll be back for the rest of my stuff later." Stacey leaned against the doorframe, watching me pack. "Oh, and what about the baby?" she asked, her voice suddenly sweet and condescending. "You're just going to abandon us?" I froze, gripping the handle of the bag so hard my knuckles turned white. I turned to face her, trying to keep my anger in check. "We're getting a paternity test. Once we know if the baby's mine, we'll figure it out," I said, my voice tight. She smirked, crossing her arms. "Oh, how noble of you." I couldn't take it anymore. "What the hell happened to you, Stacey?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "You used to be a decent person, now you're just… I don't even recognize you." Her eyes narrowed, the smirk fading from her face. "People change. Maybe if you hadn't been so boring, I wouldn't have needed someone else to make me feel alive." I felt a surge of anger, but I held it back. She wasn't worth it. I finished packing, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "Whatever, Stacey. You're not my problem anymore," I muttered as I pushed past her. As I walked out the door, I heard her shout after me, "You'll be back. You always come crawling back." But this time was different. I wasn't coming back. When I got to my car, I sat there for a moment, taking deep breaths. It was over. At least it would be soon. I drove away, feeling the weight of the last 10 years lift off my shoulders, even if it was just a little. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was done letting Stacey ruin my life. But as I pulled out of the driveway, something inside me told me this wasn't going to be as easy as walking away. The real battle was just beginning. I thought leaving would bring me some relief, but instead it felt like the calm before the storm. The real mess was about to hit, and I could feel it coming. After a few days at Mike's, I had my first meeting with the lawyer. His name was Tom, a no-nonsense kind of guy who didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out. Stacey's affair with Jake, the pregnancy, and the fact that I didn't even know if the baby was mine. Tom listened carefully, jotting down notes as I spoke. "So, you're prepared to file for divorce no matter what?" he asked, looking up from his notepad. "Yeah, I can't stay with her after all this," I replied, the certainty in my voice feeling more solid than it had in weeks. Tom nodded. "Good. We'll need to file for a paternity test as soon as possible. That's priority number 1. If the child isn't yours, it'll change a lot of things. Custody, finances, everything." Just hearing him lay it all out made my stomach churn. I had never imagined my life would come to this, sitting in a lawyer's office talking about a kid that might not even be mine. But I had no choice. I had to move forward, no matter how much it hurt. A week later, the papers were drawn up and I served Stacey with the divorce notice. I expected some kind of meltdown, but what I got instead was worse. I went back to the house to grab more of my things. Stacey was waiting for me when I walked in. The divorce papers spread out on the kitchen table. She was furious, her face twisted in anger, her arms crossed like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. "Really? Divorce?" she snapped, throwing the papers in my direction. "You're actually doing this? Over a little mistake?" "A little mistake?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You cheated on me for months. You're pregnant with a baby that might not even be mine. That's not a little mistake, Stacey." She rolled her eyes, the same condescending expression she always wore when she thought I was being dramatic. "Oh, come on, grow up. It's not like you haven't screwed up before." I stared at her, dumbfounded. What the hell are you talking about? I've never cheated on you. I've never done anything like this. Stacey snorted. Yeah, because being a workaholic who never pays attention to his wife is so much better, right? You think I wanted to cheat? You left me no choice. There it was again. The deflection. The blame. Like somehow I had driven her into another man's bed. My blood boiled, but I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. We're done, Stacey. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to pack my things. She moved closer, her eyes narrowing. You think you can just walk away? You think you can run off to your little buddy's place and leave me here to deal with everything? I shoved some clothes into my duffel bag, trying to ignore her, but she kept pushing. You'll be back. You know that? You'll come crawling back once you realize what you're throwing away. I zipped up the bag and turned to face her. No, I won't. For the first time, her tough exterior cracked. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me like she was finally realizing I meant it. This was real. And then, in true Stacey fashion, she shifted gears. Fine, she said, crossing her arms again. But you better be ready for a fight. I'll take the house, the car, and everything else. And don't even think about getting custody of this baby, whether it's yours or not. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had known Stacey could be difficult, but this was a whole new level. She wasn't just angry. She was out for blood. You really want to do this? I asked, my voice quieter now, trying to understand how we had gotten here. She smirked. Oh, I'm ready. You'll regret filing for divorce. I guarantee it. I left the house that day with a sinking feeling in my gut. I knew the road ahead was going to be rough, but I didn't fully grasp how nasty Stacey was prepared to get. The next week was hell. She started texting me nonstop, alternating between rage-filled threats and bizarre attempts to win me back. One minute she was telling me I'd never see the baby, and the next she was promising that we could make it work if I'd just come home. It was clear she was unraveling, and every conversation felt like a trap. I blocked her number after a particularly nasty call where she accused me of abandoning our marriage for some imaginary affair on my end. She was desperate, throwing out anything to keep me tangled in her web. A few days later, I got a call from Tom. You're not going to like this, he started, his tone serious. Stacey's lawyer just sent over her response to the divorce filing. My heart dropped. What is it? She's contesting everything. She wants full custody of the baby, the house, and she's claiming you've been emotionally abusive, saying that's why she had the affair. She's asking for alimony, too. Alimony? Emotional abuse? The sheer absurdity of it made me dizzy. She's lying, I said, my voice shaking. I never laid a hand on her. I never did anything like that. I know, Tom replied, his voice calm but firm. But she's trying to drag this out and make your life hell. We'll fight it, but be prepared. She's playing dirty. I hung up the phone, feeling like the walls were closing in. Stacey wasn't just angry. She was determined to destroy me. And the worst part? The paternity test was still hanging over my head like a dark cloud. I didn't even know if I was fighting for my own child. Everything was spinning out of control, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next few days felt like a blur. I was barely holding it together, going through the motions at work while my personal life was crumbling. Stacey's legal response hit me hard. Full custody? Emotional abuse? Alimony? It was like she had opened a new playbook, one designed to tear me apart from the inside out. I kept asking myself, how did we get here? How did she go from the woman I loved to this person who seemed hell-bent on ruining me? I tried not to let it consume me, but it wasn't easy. Every time I got a text or email from my lawyer, it was more bad news. Stacey wasn't just fighting the divorce, she was dragging out every little detail, making sure it would be as painful as possible. Tom, my lawyer, warned me this could take months, maybe even years. The thought of being tied to her for that long made me sick. Then a week later, I got the call I had been waiting for but dreading all the same. The paternity test results were in. I sat in my car, staring at my phone, trying to calm my racing heart. My hands shook as I dialed Tom's number. The line rang once before he picked up. "Tom, did you get the results?" There was a pause on the other end, and in that silence, I felt like I was holding my breath. Then, finally, he spoke. "Yes, I got them." I braced myself, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "And?" Another pause, this one even longer than before. "It's your baby," he said quietly. "There's no doubt." The air left my lungs in a rush, a mix of relief and devastation flooding me all at once. I didn't know what to feel. On one hand, I was glad the baby was mine. But on the other, I realized I was now forever tied to Stacey. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," Tom replied. "The results are clear. You're the father." I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, staring at the dashboard. It was a strange feeling, knowing I had a baby on the way, a baby with a woman I couldn't stand to look at anymore. Part of me wanted to be happy about it. I had always wanted to be a dad, to raise a child, but the circumstances? They were a nightmare. That night, I went back to Mike's place. We sat on his porch drinking beers while I told him the news. "So, what now?" Mike asked after a long silence. "You're going to be a dad. That's big." "Yeah," I muttered, staring into the distance. "I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. How do I raise a kid with Stacey? How do I co-parent with someone who's trying to destroy me?" Mike took a swig of his beer, thinking it over. "You gotta separate her from the kid, man. She's gonna be a pain in the ass, but you can't let her ruin this for you. It's your kid, too." I nodded, knowing he was right. As much as I hated Stacey for what she had done, I couldn't let that affect my relationship with the baby. I had to fight for my rights as a father, even if it meant dealing with her for the next 18 years. The next morning, I called Tom and told him we were moving forward. I wanted shared custody, and I wasn't backing down no matter how hard Stacey pushed. If she thought she could bully me out of my child's life, she had another thing coming. But as determined as I was, the legal battle was brutal. Stacey played dirty filing motions, delaying hearings, and making every interaction hell. She claimed she didn't trust me to be a father, saying I was unstable and too angry to raise a child. It was a smear campaign, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. The worst part? She kept using the baby as a weapon, acting like the child was some bargaining chip in our war. She knew it would crush me, and she didn't hesitate to exploit that. Then, a few weeks later, Stacey dropped another bombshell, one I didn't see coming. It was a Friday evening, and I was back at the house, gathering the last of my things. Stacey had been uncharacteristically quiet during the process, not saying much, just watching me pack. I thought for a brief moment that maybe she had finally accepted the divorce, but as I headed for the door, she stopped me. "You're not going to win," she said, her voice icy. I turned to face her. "What are you talking about?" "The custody battle," she clarified, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "I'm going to take that baby, and you're going to get nothing." I shook my head, already exhausted from the fight. "That's not going to happen, Stacey. I have rights. The baby's mine too." She laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You really think the courts are going to side with you? After everything? After what I've told them?" "Lies," I snapped. "Everything you've told them is a lie." Her smile widened, and that's when I knew she was about to say something terrible. "You think this is just about the baby, don't you?" she sneered. "Well, it's not. I've been talking to Jake." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Jake, the man who had destroyed my marriage. My stomach turned as she kept going. "And guess what? He wants to be involved. He's been thinking a lot about things, and he's ready to step up. We're going to raise the baby together." My blood ran cold. What are you talking about?" Stacey's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You heard me. Jake wants to be a father, and between the two of us, we're going to make sure you're not part of the picture." I stood there frozen as the reality of what she was saying sunk in. She wasn't just trying to win full custody. She was trying to cut me out completely and bring Jake in to take my place. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a full-blown war. I stood there staring at Stacey, my mind racing as her words hit me like a freight train. Jake wants to be involved? The man who had wrecked my marriage was now planning to play daddy to my child? Are you out of your mind? I finally managed to choke out, my voice thick with disbelief. Stacey just shrugged, that smug smile still plastered on her face. He's been thinking a lot about things, and we both agree this is what's best for the baby. You, on the other hand, you're just going to make things harder. I felt my blood boiling. She was saying this like she was doing the right thing, like she was noble for trying to cut me out. And Jake? That bastard had no right. He wasn't the father, no matter how much he wanted to play the part. You can't seriously think this is going to work, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though I could feel my anger rising with every word. You're not taking my kid from me. Stacey's eyes narrowed. Oh, I think I can. Jake's ready to take on the role. We're building a life together and you're just in the way. I took a step toward her, feeling like I was about to lose it. This isn't a game, Stacey. You can't replace me with your yoga boy and expect me to just disappear. Her smirk faded, replaced by something colder. Watch me. That was it. That was all I could take. I grabbed my bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I got into my car, and I had to sit there for a minute, trying to calm myself down. But it was impossible. I was enraged, furious at her, furious at Jake, furious at the whole damn situation. On the drive back to Mike's, I played her words over and over in my head. Jake wants to be involved. The man who had snuck around behind my back, sleeping with my wife, now wanted to step into my shoes. And Stacey, in her twisted mind, was ready to let him. I pulled into Mike's driveway, slammed the car door, and headed inside. Mike was in the living room, watching some game, but he could tell right away something was wrong. Dude, you look like you're about to explode, he said, muting the TV. I dropped onto the couch, rubbing my hands over my face. She's trying to cut me out of the kid's life, and Jake, that asshole, wants to play father. Mike's eyes widened. Wait, what? Jake? The yoga trainer? Yeah, I spat, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. She just told me. She's trying to replace me. Mike leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, that's messed up, like really messed up. Tell me about it, I muttered. I don't even know where to go from here. I can't let that happen, but Stacey's making it clear she's willing to do whatever it takes to cut me out. Dude, you can't let them get away with this, Mike said, sitting up straight. You need to fight, hard. This is your kid we're talking about. I know, I said, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me. But they're going to make it hell. Stacey's already pulling every trick in the book, lying to the courts, trying to make me look like the bad guy. And now she's got Jake in her corner. Mike was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke, his voice low and serious. You need to start gathering everything you can. Texts, emails, anything that proves she's been screwing you over. You can't let her control the narrative. I nodded, knowing he was right. If Stacey was going to fight dirty, I had no choice but to do the same. I needed to get ahead of this before it spiraled even more out of control. The next morning, I met with Tom, my lawyer, and told him everything. I told him about Stacey's plan to bring Jake into the picture, about how she was trying to push me out and make it seem like Jake was the better option. Tom listened carefully, his expression grim. This complicates things, he said finally, but it doesn't change the fact that you have rights as the father. The courts are going to see through Stacey's bullshit. We just need to make sure we build a strong case. I nodded, feeling a little more hopeful. What do I need to do? We'll need to collect as much evidence as we can. Anything that shows her instability, her lies, her relationship with Jake. The paternity test proves you're the father, and that gives you standing. We'll fight for shared custody, and if she keeps trying to cut you out, we can use that against her. Hearing Tom lay it out like that gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't going to roll over and let Stacey and Jake rewrite the rules. This was my child, and I was going to fight for my place in their life, no matter how hard they made it. Over the next few weeks, I focused on building my case. I documented every interaction with Stacey, saved every message, and kept detailed notes of all the times she tried to twist things in her favor. And while it wasn't easy, I started feeling a little more in control, like maybe I had a shot at winning this. But then, just when I thought I was starting to get a handle on things, Stacey hit me with another blow. It was a Saturday morning when I got the call. Mike and I were out grabbing breakfast when my phone buzzed. It was Tom. "You're not going to like this," he started, and my stomach dropped. "Stacey's lawyer just filed a motion for full custody, and they're claiming that Jake's the better fit for the baby's primary caregiver." "What?" I practically shouted, ignoring the looks from the people around us. "They can't do that." "They can try," Tom said, his voice calm but serious. "They're saying you're too unstable, that Jake has been more present, and that Stacey wants him to raise the child with her." I felt the blood drain from my face. How is this even legal? I'm the father. "They're playing dirty, man," Tom replied. "But don't panic. We'll fight it. I'm filing a counter motion today, but you need to be prepared. They're going to throw everything at you." I hung up the phone, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me again. Jake wasn't just a thorn in my side anymore. He was gunning for my kid, and Stacey was backing him up every step of the way. Mike looked at me, his face tense. "What's going on?" "They're trying to take everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jake and Stacey. They're trying to get full custody." The war had officially begun, and I knew that whatever came next was going to be the hardest fight of my life. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. Stacey and Jake weren't just trying to phase me out. They were actively trying to steal my child. My mind raced as I sat there in that diner, barely hearing the clatter of dishes or the murmur of other people talking. It was like the world had faded away, leaving me alone in this cold, sinking reality. Mike reached across the table, snapping me out of my daze. "You okay, man?" I shook my head, trying to focus. "No, Mike, I'm not okay. They're trying to make Jake the father in every way that matters. They're saying I'm unstable, that Jake's more fit to raise the baby." Mike's face twisted in disgust. "That's low, even for her. But dude, you can't let this get in your head. You've got to be strong. You can fight this." I nodded, but the pit in my stomach kept growing. The idea of Jake, the guy who wrecked my marriage, raising my child, playing daddy in my place, was unbearable. But there was no way I was going to let that happen. No way. Later that day, I called Tom, my lawyer, back to go over the details. "We're going to file a strong counter motion for joint custody," Tom said, his voice reassuring. "They can claim whatever they want, but the court will look at the facts. You're the father. You've been involved, and we have the paternity test to prove it." "I'm not backing down," I said firmly. "But how can they even suggest Jake's a better fit? He's the reason this whole mess started in the first place." "They're banking on the idea that because Stacey and Jake are together, they'll seem like a more stable environment for the child," Tom explained. "But don't worry. The courts won't just accept that without a fight. We'll need to show that you're just as capable, if not more, of providing a stable, loving home." I hung up the phone, feeling more focused, but still rattled. This wasn't just about fighting for my rights anymore. It was about proving I was the better option for my child. And as crazy as it sounded, I knew Jake and Stacey would stop at nothing to win. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with my lawyer, documenting every interaction with Stacey, and trying to keep my emotions in check. I had to focus on the long game. I couldn't afford to get caught up in her traps, and I couldn't let my anger cloud my judgment. But then, just when I thought I was managing to keep things together, Stacey pulled another stunt. One evening, I got a call from my neighbor Dave, who still lived next door to the house I had shared with Stacey. "Hey man, I hate to be the one to tell you this," he said, his voice low. "But I've been seeing Jake's car over at your place almost every night. Sometimes it's there till the morning." My stomach clenched. "You mean he's been staying over?" "Yeah," Dave confirmed. "It's like he's moved in or something. Just thought you should know." I thanked Dave for the heads up and hung up, my hands shaking with anger. Jake wasn't just playing Stacey's yoga instructor anymore. He was moving in, trying to take my place in every possible way. That night, I sat on Mike's porch, staring out into the night, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. Mike handed me a beer, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was Jake living in my house with my wife, or rather, ex-wife, and soon, my child. "How the hell did I get here?" I muttered, more to myself than to Mike. "How did everything fall apart so fast?" Mike sighed. "Dude, sometimes life just screws you over, but you can't let them win. You've got to hold on for that kid. They're trying to break you, and if you let them, you're giving them what they want." He was right. As much as I wanted to throw in the towel and walk away from this nightmare, I couldn't. I had to keep fighting, for my kid, if nothing else. Then, a couple of days later, things escalated again. I was sitting in Tom's office, going over the next steps for the custody battle, when my phone buzzed with a text from Stacey. "Stacey, need to talk. It's important." I showed the message to Tom, and he gave me a nod. "Go ahead. Let's hear what she has to say." I called her back, bracing for whatever manipulation or mind game she was about to throw at me this time. "What is it, Stacey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sounded different, less confrontational than usual. "We need to talk about the baby." "Okay," I replied cautiously, wondering where this was going. "I had an ultrasound today," she said, her voice softer now. "They said it looks like we're having a boy." A boy. My heart clenched at the thought. I didn't expect the rush of emotion that hit me, knowing I was going to have a son. But before I could even process it, Stacey kept talking. "Jake's really excited," she added, her voice turning smug again. "He's already talking about names." It felt like a slap to the face. I had just found out I was having a son, and she immediately followed it up by throwing Jake's name in my face, as if he had any right to be part of this. "That's my son, Stacey," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. "Jake has no place in this." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "You're going to have to get used to this. He's going to be around, a lot." I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret, my hands shaking with frustration. A boy. I was going to have a son, and yet Stacey was acting like Jake was the father, like I didn't even matter. I turned to Tom, who had been listening the whole time. "We need to hit her harder," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I'm not letting Jake take my place. I'm not losing my son to them." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "We'll keep fighting, but you need to be prepared. This is going to get uglier before it gets better." I knew he was right. Stacey wasn't going to back down, and neither was Jake. They were determined to cut me out of my son's life, to rewrite the narrative in their favor. But I wasn't going to let that happen. No matter how dirty they played, no matter how hard they tried to break me, I was going to be there for my son, and I wasn't backing down. I could feel it. The end of this nightmare was near, but not before it reached its boiling point. After the call where Stacey casually mentioned that Jake was already picking out names for my son, something inside me snapped. I realized I had been on the defensive this whole time, letting them push me around, drag me through the mud. Not anymore. I wasn't just going to fight for my rights, I was going to win. The next day, I met with Tom, my lawyer, and laid it all out. "We need to take this up a notch," I said firmly. "I'm not just going to fight for joint custody. I want full custody." Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's a big move, considering how courts usually side with the mother, especially when the baby isn't even born yet." "I know," I replied, "but I have proof that Stacey's unstable. She's been dragging Jake into this, lying to the courts, manipulating everything. We need to show that she's not fit to be the primary caregiver." Tom nodded slowly. "It's a tough road, but if we can show that she's prioritizing her relationship with Jake over the well-being of the child, we might have a case." I spent the next few weeks gathering everything I could: text messages, emails, even recordings of Stacey's erratic behavior. Mike had been a huge help, keeping an eye on things from next door and documenting the nights Jake stayed over. We were building a solid case, and I could feel the momentum shifting. Finally, the day of the custody hearing arrived. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high, determined to fight for my son. Stacey was already there, sitting next to her lawyer, looking smug as ever. And of course, Jake was there too, sitting behind her like some loyal guard dog. The hearing started off tense, with both sides presenting their cases. Stacey's lawyer tried to paint her as a loving mother, committed to providing a stable home. They even played up her relationship with Jake, trying to make it seem like a blended family would be best for the child. But then it was my turn. Tom stood up and presented the evidence we had gathered, laying out how Stacey had lied about the affair, how she had dragged Jake into every aspect of the baby's life, and how she had tried to push me out. He showed the texts, the calls, even the video footage from my neighbor proving Jake had practically moved in. "Your Honor," Tom concluded, "this isn't about providing a stable home for the child. This is about control. Ms. Stacey has been attempting to erase Mr. Simmons from his child's life, while inserting a man who has no legal right to be involved. Mr. Simmons has proven he is ready and able to care for his son, and he deserves the chance to be the primary parent." The judge looked thoughtful, but Stacey wasn't done. She stood up, tears in her eyes, playing the victim as always. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But Jake and I love this baby, and we just want what's best for him. You can't take a baby away from his mother." I wanted to scream, but I kept my cool. I had to. This wasn't about me. It was about my son. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge gave his ruling. "Given the evidence presented," he began, "it's clear that both parents care deeply about the well-being of their child. However, it's also clear that there has been a deliberate attempt by Ms. Stacey to alienate Mr. Simmons from his child's life. This court does not look kindly on parental alienation." I held my breath, waiting for what came next. "I am granting primary custody to Mr. Simmons, with shared custody to Ms. Stacey. Furthermore, any involvement from third parties such as Mr. Jake shall be limited to what is deemed appropriate by the court and under supervision." I felt a wave of relief crash over me. I had won. My son wasn't going to be raised by Jake. I was going to be the one there for him, guiding him, loving him, and no one, not Stacey, not Jake, was going to take that from me. Stacey's face went pale as the ruling sank in. She tried to protest, but the judge cut her off. "This decision is final," the judge said firmly. "You may revisit custody arrangements as the child grows, but for now, Mr. Simmons will be the primary caregiver." I couldn't help but glance back at Jake, who sat there with his jaw clenched, looking like the world had just been pulled out from under him. Good. Let him feel what I had been feeling for months. Let him see that he couldn't just swoop in and take over my life. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet. There would still be co-parenting with Stacey, still battles to come. But I had won the most important fight. I had won my son. Outside the courthouse, Stacey caught up with me. Her face was red with anger, but there was something else there too. Fear. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this." I looked her dead in the eyes, feeling stronger than I had in months. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Stacey. You've done enough damage, but now it's my turn to protect what's mine." I turned and walked away, not bothering to listen to whatever she was muttering under her breath. I didn't care anymore. I had my son, and nothing she or Jake did could take that away. That night, I sat at Mike's place, finally able to breathe again. Mike clapped me on the back. handing me a beer. "To victory, man," he said with a grin. "To a new beginning," I replied, feeling hope for the first time in what felt like forever. Because now, I wasn't just a guy whose marriage had fallen apart. I wasn't just a victim of Stacey's betrayal. I was a father who had fought for his son and won. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing for sure. I was going to be the best damn dad I could be. For him.